Hello, mathematicians. Today we're going to be learning about exponents, more specifically about evaluating exponents with a mixed number base. To get us started, we have 1 2/3 to the power of 3, or we could read this as 1 2/3 cubed. The first thing we want to do to evaluate this expression is write 1 2/3 cubed as repeated multiplication. That means that 1 2/3 cubed is equal to 1 2/3 times 1 2/3 times 1 2/3. And the reason why we multiply 1 2/3 by itself 3 times is because our exponent is 3. Then we're going to write our mixed numbers as improper fractions. And 1 2/3 is equal to 5/3. Let me show you how. So here we have one whole, and we split it up into 3 parts because the number we're talking about is 1 2/3. So we're going to focus on thirds. And if we have one whole and we're talking about thirds, that means that we're going to have 3 out of 3 pieces shaded in. Then we also have 2/3. So that means we have 2 out of 3 pieces shaded in. So here we have one whole and 2/3. Notice that in total we have 5 pieces shaded in, and in order to make a whole we need 3. So that means that 1 2/3 is equal to 5/3. The 5 represents how many parts we have shaded, and the thirds represents how many we need to make a whole. So we need 3 pieces, and that's where we get the denominator from. So that means that 1 2/3 times 1 2/3 times 1 2/3 is equal to 5/3 times 5/3 times 5/3. Next, we're going to go ahead and multiply 5/3 times 5/3 times 5/3. In order to do so, we first have to multiply our numerators. So 5 times 5 times 5 is equal to 125. And then we multiply our denominators. So 3 times 3 times 3 is equal to 27. Notice that our answer is an improper fraction. So the next thing we're going to do is write 125 over 27 as a mixed number. In order to do that, we have to divide 125 divided by 27. So we're going to go ahead and set up our long division here. And we ask ourselves, how many times does 27 go into 1? Well, it doesn't. So then we ask ourselves, how many times does 27 go into 12? And it doesn't. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 27 go into 125? And 27 goes into 125 4 times. And that's because 27 times 4 is equal to 108. So we're going to take the 125 and subtract it by 108. And 125 minus 108 is equal to 17. So we have a remainder of 17. That means that 27 goes into 125 4 times. So 4 is going to be the whole number in our mixed number. We have a remainder of 17. And then it's going to be out of 27 because it takes 27 parts to make a whole. So 125 over 27 is equal to 4 and 17 over 27. And the last thing we want to do is write a numerical equation showing that 1 2/3 cubed and 4 and 17 over 27 are equivalent. So 1 2/3 cubed is equal to 4 and 17 over 27. Here we have another example, which is 2 3/5 to the power of 2. Or we could read this as 2 3/5 squared. The first thing we want to do is write this as repeated multiplication. So that means that 2 3/5 squared is equal to 2 3/5 times 2 3/5. The next thing we want to do is take our mixed numbers and write them as improper fractions. Now here we're talking about fifths, and remember that in order to make one whole, we need 5 parts shaded out of 5 equal parts, meaning that one whole is equal to 5 out of 5. Now, in our example, we have 2 wholes. So because we have 2 wholes, we're going to multiply it by 5, which is our denominator, and that would give us 10 parts. And that's because if we had 2 circles, each one of them would have 5 equal parts, and because they both have 5 equal parts shaded, in total that would equal to 10 parts. Then we're going to take those 10 parts from our 2 wholes and include our 3/5. So 10 parts represents the 2 wholes, but we still have 3/5 left over. And because the 3/5 is not enough to make a whole, we're just going to go ahead and add those 3 additional parts, and we get this number from our numerator. So that means that 2 3/5 is a total of 13 parts. So 2 3/5 is equal to 13 parts out of 5. So each circle is divided into 5 equal parts, and we have 13 of those shaded. So 13 out of 5. So that means that 2 3/5 times 2 3/5 is equal to 13 over 5 times 13 over 5. So 13/5 times 13/5, in order to multiply that, we have to go ahead and multiply the numerators first. So 13 times 13 is equal to 169, and 5 times 5 is equal to 25. All right, so there we go. We have our answer. However, it's written as an improper fraction. So we want to go ahead and write that as a mixed number. In order to do so, we have to do 169 divided by 25. So we're going to set up our long division. 25 does not go into 1. 25 does not go into 16. But 25 goes into 169 6 times. And 25 times 6 is equal to 150. So we're going to go ahead and subtract 169 minus 150, and that equals 19. So 25 goes into 169 6 whole times, making our whole number 6. Then we have a remainder of 19, meaning we have 19 parts out of 25, because that's what we're dividing by, and that's how much we need to make a whole. And we have 19 out of 25 left over. So that means that 169 over 25 is equal to 6 and 19 over 25. And then we're going to go ahead and write an equation showing that 2 3/5 squared is equal to 6 and 19 over 25. Here we have another example, which is 3.5 to the power 4. The first thing we want to do to evaluate this expression is rewrite it using repeated multiplication. So 3.5 to the power 4 is equal to 3.5 times 3.5 times 3.5 times 3.5. The next thing we want to do is write our mixed numbers as improper fractions to make it easier for us to multiply. And in order to do so, first consider that when we're dealing with halves, that means 2 parts, in order to have one whole, we need 2 out of 2 parts shaded. So That's what we need to make one whole. In our example, we have 3 wholes. So if we have 3 wholes, that means that each whole is going to have 2 out of 2 parts shaded, because our denominator is out of 2, and in order to make a whole, we need those 2 parts shaded. So we take our 3 wholes, multiply it by 2, and that means we have 6 parts in 3 wholes. And then we're going to take our 6 parts and add it to the additional 1 part that we have from our fraction, because we have 3 wholes and 1 out of 2, and that would be from our numerator. And then that means that we have a total of 7 parts shaded in 3.5. So 3.5 is equal to 7 out of 2. So that means that 3.5 times 3.5 times 3.5 times 3.5 is equal to 7 over 2 times 7 over 2 times 7 over 2 times 7 over 2. And in order to multiply these improper fractions, what we need to do first is multiply our numerators. So 7 times 7 times 7 times 7 is equal to 2,401. And then let's go ahead and multiply our denominators. So 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 is equal to 16. So our answer is 2,401 over 16. But because that's an improper fraction, we're going to go ahead and write that as a mixed number. In order to do that, we have to divide our numerator by our denominator. So 2,401 divided by 16. We're going to divide that using long division. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 2? Well, it doesn't. So we ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 24? 16 goes into 24 one time, because 16 times 1 is equal to 16. So we're going to go ahead and write the 16 underneath. 24 minus 16 is equal to 8. So what we're going to do next is bring down the following digit. So we bring down the 0, and now we have 80, and we ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 80? Well, 16 goes into 85 times, because 16 times 5 is equal to 80. So we're going to go ahead and subtract by 80. 80 minus 80 is equal to 0. Now we're going to go ahead and bring down our next digit, which is 1. And we ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 1? Well, 16 goes into 1 0 times, because 16 times 0 is equal to 0. And 16 times 1 would equal 16, and that would be way too high. So we're going to go ahead and subtract by 0. 1 minus 0 is equal to 1. Now, 16 goes into 2,401 150 times. So that would be our whole number for our mixed number. And then we have a remainder of 1. So that would be our numerator, because we have 1 part left over. And then we're dividing by 16, and it takes 16 parts out of 16 to make a whole. So it's 1 out of 16. So that means that 2,401 over 16 is equal to 150 and 1 over 16. So 3.5 to the power 4 is equal to 150 and 1 over 16. Here we have our final example, which is 5 3/4 to the power of 2, or we could read this as 5 3/4 squared. The first thing we want to do is write this using repeated multiplication. So that means that 5 3/4 squared is equal to 5 3/4 times 5 3/4. Because we're talking about fourths, keep in mind that it takes 4 parts shaded out of 4 equal parts to make a whole. So one whole would be 4 out of 4. Because we have 5 wholes here, we're going to multiply it by 4, which is our denominator, and the amount of pieces it takes to make a whole, and that would equal to 20 parts. That means if we had 5 wholes, we would have 20 parts shaded. And in order to make a whole, we need 4. Then we're going to take these 20 parts and add 3 parts. And that's because we have 5 wholes and 3/4. So we have those 3 additional parts that have yet to make a whole. So 20 parts plus 3 is equal to 23 parts. So that means that 5 3/4 is equal to 23 out of 4. So 5 3/4 times 5 3/4 equals to 23 over 4 times 23 over 4. And in order to multiply these improper fractions, we have to multiply our numerators first. 23 times 23 is equal to 529, and 4 times 4 is equal to 16. Now, notice that our answer is an improper fraction. What we need to do is rewrite this as a mixed number. In order to do that, we have to go ahead and divide. So 529 divided by 16. We ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 5? Well, it doesn't. So then we ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 52? 16 goes into 52 3 times, because 16 times 3 is equal to 48. We're going to go ahead and subtract. 52 minus 48 is equal to 4. And then we bring down our 9. And then we ask ourselves, how many times does 16 go into 49? 16 goes into 49 3 times, because 16 times 3 is equal to 48. So then we're going to subtract. 49 minus 48 is equal to 1. So 16 goes into 529 33 times, so that's our whole number. We have a remainder of 1, so that's our numerator. And then we're dividing by 16, so that's our denominator, because it takes 16 parts to make a whole. So 529 over 16 is equal to 33 and 1 over 16. So that means that 5 3/4 squared is equal to 33 and 1 over 16. And that's it.